Life of the forest, richness of undergrowth and understory. Poland, lying in the temperate zone, is characterized by a transitional climate, which favors the occurrence of deciduous and coniferous forests. Their proper functioning depends on the seasons, negative winter temperatures, and warm and humid summer months. The Polish forests, especially deciduous ones, are characterized by a multi-story structure, which can usually be divided into 4 layers. The trees, one of the finest and most powerful living components of the biosphere, are the basic element of every forest. They form the top forest floor and shape the other layers. The trees have a significant impact on the light reaching the lower floors, control their humidity and temperature, and affect the nature of forest soils. As a result, the nature of the lower layers of the forest is very variable in various plant formations and communities. In the vertical structure of the forest, apart from the crown of trees, the lowest layer is also distinguished, that is, forest duff and 2 intermediate layers: undergrowth and understory. In coniferous forests, we can also distinguish the mossy layer. The vegetation cover of the undergrowth and understory of the temperate zone depends on the type of habitat, and more simply, on the type of forest. In coniferous forests, the undergrowth is relatively poor and does not change significantly at different times of the year. In deciduous and mixed forests, this layer is the lushest and most varied in early spring. Then the understory is dense, and in the undergrowth you can observe the most species of shrubs and herbaceous plants. Many of them bloom profusely. In summer and autumn, when the forest floor is shaded by tree leaves, the nature of this layer changes. The interior of dense and dark coniferous forests, especially spruce forests, where the ground is poor in acid and the light does not reach much, is not propitious to species diversity. The layers of undergrowth and understory are inhabited by many animal species. The most frequent here are insects, and undoubtedly the most well-known and common ones are ants. Amphibians and reptiles constitute a large group, but unfortunately they are becoming rarer and rarer, not only in the forest environment. That is why in our country they are fully protected by law. There are also many birds and mammals associated with these layers of vegetation, which gain food, raise their offspring, relax, and seek shelter here. It is the middle of winter. It is so quiet in the forest that it seems lifeless. However, trees, shrubs, and other plants are living organisms that have lost energy to survive this unfavorable period. A lot of plants, such as junipers and heathers covered with a layer of white fluff, are in a winter sleep, just like some animals. Others spend winter in the form of seeds, bulbs, or specially transformed, overgrown roots, rhizomes, waiting for the moment when in spring they would be able to grow into an adult plant. Animals in winter neither have an easy life. Traces left in the snow are evidence of their search for food, which at this time of year is definitely harder to find. Foresters also plant fruit trees and shrubs in the woods to provide animals with more food, especially in winter. Birds prefer to eat fruit that has remained on bushes and trees, or they look for food on the ground. Others, such as the capercaillie, keep their winter diet based on the needles of pine, spruce, or fir. This trail has been left by a moose. In winter, it must travel many kilometers to find a suitable feeding ground. At this time of year, like the capercaillie, it eats shoots and bark of coniferous trees, which provides it with high-energy food. When the sun begins to warm stronger and longer and the winter slowly goes away, the forest clearly begins to wake up. At the end of February, male inflorescence called catkin appears on the branches of hazel. Male catkins hang from branches reaching a few centimeters in length. They consist of individual flowers grouped together, and they produce copious amounts of pollen. Female flowers are inconspicuous and end with red tendrils reminiscent of a brush. In spite of the snow still lying in some places and low temperatures, the flowering hazel means the arrival of the early spring, long awaited by nature. Birds stimulated by the warmth of the sun are more active. The forest now resounds with their loud singing. Plants that have spent the winter underground are now starting to race to use the light and open the flowers before the trees form leaves. Solar energy controls the seasons that transform our forests into fairy tale gardens. In spring, the undergrowth and understory in our deciduous and mixed forests abound in stunning colors. A distinctive feature of forests shedding leaves for winter is a significant seasonal diversity of the undergrowth. It consists mainly of herbaceous plants, whereas shrubs and bryophytes play a smaller role. At the turn of February and March, in the understory layer, in shady deciduous and mixed forests, as well as in thickets, the mesoreum blooms for the first time. Its pink flowers appear even before leaves. Melliferous mesoreum is pollinated by the first active insects. At the same time as the mesoreum, in places appropriate for them, the snowdrops are blooming. They feel best in the shade or partial shade of alluvial forests and in hornbeam and beech forests. They usually grow in hundreds or thousands of individuals there. Snowdrops are often mistaken for spring snowflakes. In appearance, they are very similar, but they differ in two features of the external structure: leaf color and small perianth leaves. Snowdrops have uneven perianth leaves, whereas in spring snowflakes they are all even, with green tips. In addition, snowdrops have grey-green leaves and snowstorm vividly dark green. Spring snowflakes in Poland occur mainly in the Sudety and Carpathians, especially abundantly in the Bieszczady Mountains. They are rarely found in other areas. They usually grow in large clusters, sometimes counting several thousands of individuals. They can be found in alluvial forests and in acidic, moist mid-forest meadows and clearings. Carpathian toothwort is another characteristic plant in the Bieszczady Mountains. It is a Carpathian subendemite, which means that it occurs in a specific geographical zone or close to the main home area. In Poland, outside the Carpathians, you can come across it in a few places of the southeastern part of the lowlands. In early spring in deciduous forests, mainly beech forests, Carpathian toothworts often form flowering fields. It is a typical shade-bearing plant. Their stems grow to a height of about 30 centimeters, and at the tops, in April, flowers with purple petals appear. On a March evening, in a secluded and quiet place, the capercaillie male sits on the tree and begins tooting. Now, in the darkness, it is hardly visible, but you can hear it well. It produces a not very loud song consisting of 4 parts. In the morning, it flies to the ground and continues tooting. You can now admire its ritual behavior. Like a ghost, it penetrates among the tall bushes of the marsh. Every now and then it stops, spreads its fan-shaped tail, sticks out its head and raises its feathers. The capercaillie mating rituals, depending on the region of Poland and habitat conditions, may last until May. In Poland, there are few capercaillies endangered with extinction. Their numbers have been declining for many years. The foresters are engaged in the protection of those beautiful birds so that in the spring their characteristic mating call can still be heard in the woods. Wood and yellow anemones are an undoubted decoration of spring forests. They form wonderful floral rugs characteristic of deciduous and mixed forests in March and April. Anemone fruits ripen in May and June. Wood anemones turn their flowers towards the sun throughout the day. Above, the hazel leaves move in the same rhythm, pulsing and expanding to a full size. Young hazel leaves form the upper part of the understory layer, thereby shading the forest floor. Against this unique background of the fields of multicolored flowers of undergrowth and understory, you can observe various representatives of the forest fauna. As early as at the end of March, common toads emerge from the underground hideouts covered with leaves. Heavily emaciated, they walk awkwardly towards the nearest water reservoirs, where they immediately start mating. The hedgehog has also awoken from the winter sleep. Its body is covered with about 5,000 spines. It is a loner who only mates for the mating season. In search of food, it can persistently wander. It is rarely seen in the light of day. During the night, it can make a distance of up to 2 kilometers. Hedgehogs are omnivorous, although they prefer animal food. In the undergrowth layer, also reptiles such as snakes and lizards find excellent living conditions. The most common reptile is the grass snake, which owes its Polish name to the characteristic yellowish patches behind the temples. It prefers to stay in wetlands near lakes and mid-forest ponds. It is a great swimmer, which allows it to efficiently hunt animals associated with the aquatic environment. A particularly diverse and the largest group of animals in undergrowth and understory are insects. After winter hibernation, as soon as the warm air fills their shelter, the ants immediately start working. They are a symbol of diligence and not without reason. Some plants make use of it and employ these insects as porters. Transferred seeds have a special ant pack, an appendix containing fats and carbohydrates. This encourages insects to cooperate. The seed reaches a safe place deep inside the anthill. Ants eat a nutritious appendix. The seed itself is not attractive to them and has ideal conditions to germinate. Ants can be found all over Poland, and there are over 100 species. They are all extremely useful for the forest and can be called great foresters' allies. They feed mainly on insects that damage tree leaves. Another large group of forest insects are arachnids. Many of them, like this flower crab spider, live in bright areas. Most often, they can be found on the edge of forests, along forest paths, or in clearings. They do not build hunting nets. Instead, they lurk for their victims hidden among the flowers. The harvestman spider is easy to recognize by its perfectly elliptical body and extremely long and thin legs. Female harvestmen are much larger than males. The undergrowth and understory layer is home to numerous larger mammals. Here, both predatory, herbivores and omnivores can easily prey or rest. The most common of these mammals is the wild boar. It eats almost everything: carrion, plant tubers, small animals, and in autumn acorns, nuts, and beech nuts, that is, beech seeds. It looks for shelter in the thicket of shrubs or coniferous young trees. Wild boars are active in the forest throughout the year. In May, when the spring gathers momentum and the temperature rises and it gets warm enough, in the undergrowth starts to bloom a dignified and intensely scented lily of the valley. Its white pendant flowers, gathered in clusters attached to one side of the stem, resemble bells. Aromatic nectar attracts many pollinating insects. Lily of the valley finds the best conditions for development in moderately shaded deciduous and mixed forests, where it often forms extensive fields. Sometimes plants show all their glory, growing individually among other species, like here, in the field of the sweet-scented bedstraw, also known as the sweet woodruff. This delicate plant, with fragile and bare stems, produces numerous shoots growing up to 30 centimeters in height. Its top is finished with small flowers gathered in canopies. Thanks to the content of coumarin, its smell resembles that of hay. It grows in shady deciduous forests, especially in beech forests. When it produces seeds, they are carried by animals and people as they attach to hair or clothes with hooks. Like most spring-flowering plants, it is poisonous. In a similar habitat occurs two-leaved false lily of the valley, common throughout Poland. It can also be found in mixed spruce or alder forests. This small plant, reaching only 20 centimeters, is an indicator species of old woods. It often creates large clusters. Species of the herbaceous plants in the undergrowth layer, which are threatened with extinction, among others, because of adverse climate changes, are multiplied by foresters and forest arboretums. Then they find their suitable habitats, and in this way, with the help of humans, they have a chance to survive in the natural environment. When the undergrowth is in full bloom, just above it, the understory also develops intensively. The Guelder rose is now blooming in moist habitats, and the bird cherry in alluvial and alder forests. In the wet forests at the beginning of May, young cranes are born. In early spring, their parents build a nest there. The female laid 2 olive-brown eggs in it. Now that the young are strong and stand firmly on their own feet, they are leaving the nest. Yet for a long time, they will be hiding from the dangers lurking among the lush vegetation. In wet and shady coniferous forests, undergrowth and understory are usually poor. Due to the dense tree crowns, sunlight is scarce here, and the acidic and nutrient-poor medium means that herbaceous plants are almost absent, and ferns and mosses have taken their place. In the Polish forests, we observe a multitude of species of mosses and lichens. In coniferous forests, in dry places, the undergrowth can be covered with lichen. Such forests, where the basic forest-forming species is pine, where the understory is extremely scanty and the undergrowth is very poor, are called lichen pine forests. The lichen owes its Polish name to the specificity of its occurrence because it literally grows on stones, soil, bark of trees, and dead and decaying parts of plants. They are unique organisms because they arise from symbiosis of fungus and algae. They occur mainly as pioneer species, that is, those that first inhabit unfavorable and hostile areas. The most common in Polish forests include grey and woodland reindeer lichen, which are very easy to distinguish by the color of the talus. Also, horsetails related to ferns and creeping cedars appear in the undergrowth of the forest. It is impossible not to recognize wood horsetails because their shoots take on a very characteristic shape of delicate small Christmas trees. They owe their name to the sounds they make when picked up. In wet forests, on peat bogs or in swamp forests, in wetlands and shady areas grows a marsh Labrador tea. Such forests have their specific smell of essential oils from the leaves and shoots of the marsh Labrador tea. This strong and characteristic aroma can even cause dizziness and headaches. Along with the marsh Labrador tea occur such species as bog rosemary, heather, cranberry, and rare, especially in northern Poland, cross-leaved heath. This beautiful shrub has characteristic needle-like leaves with rolled-up edges. Their green color contrasts well with light pink flowers. The smallest plants living in the undergrowth are the thorny bushes of blackberry and raspberry. They often form such a dense thicket that it is difficult to get through them without scratches. Blackberry is one of the most aggressive of the forest plants. Its shoots develop at a rapid pace, covering other plants. Shoots equipped with spikes allow it to climb everything it meets in its path. Some species of blackberries grow up to 2 meters in height. In the understory grow also larger bushes, such as the spindle, lilacs, hazel, as well as the bird cherry, dog rose, and hawthorn. Among the bushes and young trees seeks its shelter the European tree frog, which, in search of insects, can climb to a height of 1 meter. The orchids have seeds as tiny as dust pollen, which can be carried by the lightest breeze. Thanks to this, on large areas of the forest we can meet various species of these plants. In sunny spots, on xerothermic mountain grasslands grows a fly orchid. It owes its name to the characteristic structure of flowers. They imitate female Hymenoptera by their appearance. Males confuse the fly orchid flower with females and pollinate flowers during pseudo-copulation. In Poland, this is the only such case among orchids. In deciduous forests, mainly beech forests, there is another very rare, disappearing in Poland representative of the orchid family, a red helleborine. It can be found in very few spots. It prefers fertile soils and belongs to the thermophilic type plants. Its flowers, although they do not produce nectar, attract pollinating insects due to their intense color and specific structure. After flowering and seeding by orchids, foresters mow open adjacent areas to prevent the succession of trees and shrubs, thus preserving the habitats of these rare, beautiful plants. In the world of insects found in the undergrowth and understory, the largest group are beetles. They are of different sizes and various, sometimes surprising shapes. Also, their coloration can be fabulously colorful or camouflage. Most beetles are herbivorous, although there are also predatory and omnivorous species. Many of these insects live in decaying and dead wood. A stag beetle reaches a length of up to 6 centimeters and is one of the largest beetles in the Polish forests. It occurs mainly in oak forests, where in June adults feed on the juice leaking from the trees. Males are equipped with huge ruminants that are used to fight for females. Another large and attractive-looking beetle is a rhinoceros beetle. It can be found in deciduous forests, but very rarely because its activity increases after dusk. During the day, it is buried in heaps of rotting plants. It is very slow and rarely flies. The female rhinoceros beetle lays eggs in decaying stumps of old deciduous trees and in dead roots. The larva is the largest among beetles found in Europe. Spring bloom does not last long. At the end of April, trees develop their crowns. The time for anemones and other photophilous flowers is over. For several weeks of the activity, they accumulated so much food that it is enough to produce seeds and new bulbs or rhizomes hidden in the moist soil. When the leaves appear on the trees, the shade will return to the forest, and only a few plants will remain in the undergrowth. In mid-June, when spring gives way to summer, many different voices can still be heard in the forest. Now, at dawn and in the evening, melodic concerts of nightingales and frogs resound. The chicks are still in some bird nests, most often in these species that have several breeding periods each year. Robins can have up to 5 chicks at this time, which are fed by both parents until they leave the nest. Also, blackbirds all day long carry dozens of caught insects and earthworms taken from the ground to the nest full of bright, gaping beaks. In early summer, large quantities of green leaves, full of easily digestible carbohydrates, become fertile meadows where a huge number of creatures graze. Some plants, which do not want to be eaten massively, produce poison. However, it does not deter all insects, among others butterfly caterpillars. In summer, in mountain herbs, in the free spaces of the dwarf mountain pine, in the forest clearings, but above all in luminous forests, a beautifully looming foxglove is often found. Its flowers resemble gaping jaws that invite insects to collect pollen from them. But insects not only make use of the flowers. Aphids eagerly suck juices from the foxglove, and ants live in symbiosis with the aphids. They provide protection and peace during feeding to Hemiptera, and in return they make use of sweet, high-energy honeydew excreted by aphids. Ants literally milk aphids, striking with their tentacles on their abdomen so that the insects release drops of the anticipated secretion. Wild strawberries and blueberries begin to bear fruit and undergrowth when summer reaches its fullness. Such fruitful undergrowth looks very appetizing. Even a brown bear will not refuse a meal. It may only be surprising that the largest domestic predatory mammal is also a great amateur of forest fruit. The size and weight of the bear is impressive and awesome. An adult male can reach up to 400 kilograms and measure 2.5 meters in length. It occurs mainly in the Bieszczady Mountains, Tatra Mountains and Beskids. The bear needs huge spaces rich in food and given the opportunity to hide. It is reluctant to leave the forest with its thick and dense understory. Wolves also occupy large territories where they hunt, eat and rest. In Poland, they occur mainly in forests, and individual packs clearly define their territories, in the center of which, in the most inaccessible place, arrange their lair. The wolf is a predator, and in nature it mostly feeds on small animals. However, when the size of the pack and the availability of large herbivores is adequate, it allows itself to hunt larger prey, for example deer. Already in midsummer, heathers begin to decorate forests with pink lilac colors. These small dwarf shrubs occur in various plant communities, such as pine forests, peat bogs, as well as on dunes, but always where the soil is poor and acidic. They feel great in sunny places. Heather is a valued honey plant, so beekeepers are eager to put their apiaries close to the heaths. Bees flying among small flowers can collect up to 120 kilograms of honey from 1 hectare covered with heathers. In Poland, almost all over its area, heather is a common plant. After long hot months, it is finally time to rest. Autumn begins in the forest. Despite the fact that the sun can still heat strongly, the days become clearly shorter and the nights moist and cool. Mornings are covered with thick fog, and it is raining more and more often. Most plants have already produced colorful and sugar-rich fruits with seeds hidden inside. Now rowan, blackthorn, viburnum and many other shrubs use black and red to attract birds. Ripe fruits in this way indicate that they can be eaten, so that the birds will move their seeds over long distances. Many birds then exchange insects for fruit and seeds, which are especially important to them because of their easily absorbable sugar. When the autumn comes to the forest, the leaves begin to change into many colors and fall. After some time, the trees slowly suspend their activity. Nature slows down. Day by day, the singing of birds is less audible, and those that remain for the winter begin to accumulate food. In the autumn, jays feed mainly on acorns, beet seeds, nuts, and fruit. Greedily and in a hurry, they collect and transfer them to different places. Having hidden them in the ground, forest litter or between roots, they often forget about them, thus contributing to the spreading of various heavy seeds. It can be said that the birds carrying forest seeds plant a new forest side by side with foresters. When wet autumn winds sweep backwards in the undergrowth, fruiting bodies of mushrooms begin to appear in large numbers. Mushrooms belong to a separate kingdom of living organisms on the earth. They produce the smallest spores that resemble seeds to a large extent. They are so small that they spread like smoke. Mushrooms have no stems, roots, or leaves. They cooperate with trees and their roots to get nutrients. In return, they increase the opportunities for tree roots to collect water. This type of coexistence of the tree and fungus is called mycorrhiza. Their effective fruiting bodies appear for a short time. As soon as the spores are fired, they collapse and die. Some forest mushrooms produce large and tasty fruiting bodies that are eagerly harvested by humans. When little light reaches the forest, the day is becoming short and it gets really cold, and the last leaves from the trees and shrubs fall, it is a sign that winter is approaching. Perennial plants fall asleep. It will allow them to survive this difficult time. The undergrowth and understory are an essential element of the entire forest. In a complex forest ecosystem, where every organism, plant or animal is important and irreplaceable, the lower floors of the forest perform many important functions. Thanks to the dense root network, the undergrowth and understory plants protect the soil against erosion and, by shading it, reduce the rate of water evaporation. In this way, they improve the water relations and climate inside the forest. Falling leaves form a layer of duff that transforms into humus. This, in turn, improves soil structure and introduces into it mineral compounds that are easily absorbed by various plant, animal, and fungal organisms. In the duff can be found the greatest richness of species and countless amounts of organisms, practically invisible to the human eye. All organisms that make up these two floors of the forest are of great importance also for the other layers and determine their mutual functioning. So, while staying in the forest, lean over the undergrowth and then gradually look up towards the understory and try to see all the extraordinary features that these two layers of the forest hide.